Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to attend my session on getting started with adaptive cards for Microsoft Teams using lists and Power Automate. This is a solution that I use daily in my work life, and I found it intimidating at first to learn this new skill set and implement it. And my hope is that when we come through this session, you'll see that the barrier to using adaptive cards for Teams with lists and Power Automate is not as high as you thought. And if I can do it, I'm confident that you can do it as well. My name is Norm Young. I'm coming to you from a very sunny St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. And I don't expect you to know where St. Catharines is, but you've probably heard of Niagara Falls and you've probably heard of Toronto. I'm kind of between both of those places. I'm currently working at a company called tyGraph. And at tyGraph, we do data and analytics around Office 365 usage and adoption. And I like to spend a lot of my time in the organization working on process improvement, advocating not only for the tyGraph toolset, but also for Office 365. And I'm quite passionate about these areas, and this is why I'm able to come to events like this and share some of the things that I've learned along the way. I'm a Microsoft MVP and have been so for the last couple of years, and it's great to be here again. This will be my third time at a workshop for the Minnesota user group, and fourth time speaking at one of the events. So it's an absolute pleasure to come here. The participants always ask great questions. It's always engaging, and the organizers and moderators do a fantastic job. So it's always a pleasure to be here. So is there a question already, or am I just hearing background noise? I think I'm just hearing background noise. Sorry about that. So the basics. Well, what are adaptive cards? I'm confident that you would have all seen them being delivered to you inside of Teams or maybe a chat bot or even an Outlook. But what they are just very small containers of information that have been sent to you either to give you a current state or status or to have you act on them. So these are very small snippets or containers of information, but they're cross-platform. And that means that you can write or develop an adaptive card once and use it across platforms like Outlook, Teams, Viva Connections, and many more. Could we mute the participants, please? You can also have things like actions. You could have a button to jump to a URL, a button to present data and feedback back to the process that has sent things out. So it's not just this small bit of information, it's also an opportunity to take action in the place where our users are working. And so Teams is a great platform to bring all this together. A lot of our work is already happening in Teams. You know, there's the Microsoft advertising is saying, you know, it's your hub for teamwork in Microsoft Teams. Well, that is really becoming the reality for a lot of us. So the more we can bring information and action to where our users are working, we're adding value, there's no context switching, and adaptive cards become very powerful. Now, they're written in JSON, and if you're not a developer, like I am not a developer, it can be very intimidating to try and write this code from scratch. But thankfully, there are tools at our disposal that bring that barrier down again. Some of the common use cases that we see with adaptive cards are sending out news articles from our SharePoint intranet, announcements being targeted to certain users with the ability to click and jump back into that referencing article. We also see a lot of adaptive cards being used for task management. For example, coming out of Planner, I can send a new assignment or a reminder to complete an assignment to an assignee inside of Planner, let them view the details, provide them contextual information in that card, or even take action like marking it as complete. It's a pretty powerful use case. We can also do things like approvals, a document approval. You're in a highly compliant organization, you have to, go through some lifecycle management of a document. You can send it and route that document out to your level 1 for approval, and it can all be done in the context of Teams. I can get the notice, I can get the link to the document, I can approve, reject, and so on. All within Teams, no context switching required. You can also do things like gathering user input. Send out a form, give me your name, give me your email. Are you interested in this thing that we're doing? All great ways to solicit, not context switch. And I'll probably be saying that quite a bit because this is where the value is going to come. Pushing information, allowing them to take action where they already are. That's value. So the adaptive cards have a structure. And as we look at the example that is on the slide, the outermost container is called the adaptive card, one word. It's the object, it's the root object that describes everything that's happening in the card itself. And it has a bunch of information that tells the different platforms how it should behave, how it should translate, how it looks. And this is where that platform agnostic benefits of using adaptive cards comes in, because you're saying this is how you should interpret this workload to the thing that is executing it or displaying it. And then we see inside of number 2, there's a body, and the body is where we're going to piece together all of the elements and the properties that will show text, like here is NinjaCat, or show the picture that here is the NinjaCat picture, or add a button, through our actions that will open up what's behind that link. Basic container, and inside the container, we'll tell it what version to execute or emulate, what device we're on, what we're using for our platform, and the different components that we'll lay out on the card, and what the card should do if something is interacted with. Now, as I said before, and you can have a sense of it in this image, I'm moving my mouse around the card payload editor, and we can see the JSON text. It's long. It's complicated for non-developers like me. So we use a tool called the adaptivecards.io designer. It's a website, you just go to it and you use it interactively. In the future, I expect we'll be seeing something in context of where we're working inside of like Microsoft Teams or Power Automate that will look very similar to this, but this is our design canvas. There's a number of key features that we will use as we're building our cards. The first thing that I'll call out in number 1 is the new card button. When you open it, the experience gives you a number of pre-built samples that you can choose from. And I think this is very important. Because the samples will give us a starting point. It's very noble if you want to develop a card from the ground up. But if you're trying to learn how to use them, if you're trying to bring value to your users quickly, consider using a sample that fits your requirements so you can fast track that time to value. Number 2, you'll see it says select host app. And in this example, it says Microsoft Teams, but all of the other workloads are listed there as well, from Viva to Bot to Outlook. So you can make that designer show you how the card will look on those different platforms. Number 3, it says target version. There are multiple versions of the adaptive cards JSON schema. Depending on the platform that you're sending it to, you may have to come to a particular version of the schema. In this image, I have it pointing at 1.3. And that is one that is compliant with Teams. And it goes up to version 1.5. 1.5 is not supported by Teams. 1.4 is kind of supported depending on the actions that you're going to do. Number 4, we can see the card elements shown on the left-hand side, and you'll see things like containers, elements, and inputs. And you can drag those onto the design canvas or the card canvas and start to build out what the card is going to look like. And then to the right, as we come over and see the card structure, we'll see that each of those elements that we drag over will have associated properties to the elements that we can set and we can manipulate. Down at number 6, you see the card payload editor, As we're creating things dynamically on the canvas, the JSON is being auto-created for us in the editor. And this is the most powerful thing for me because I don't have to know this JSON. It just happens. Number 7, the reason why we go here is to copy that payload and use it elsewhere. And so I'm going to show this in more hands-on detail when we get into the demos, but this will be your primary tool for developing the card without having to know JSON and be a JSON developer. Pardon me while I get another drink. I'm losing my voice already, and that's not a good sign. Demos. So hopefully this is why we're here. Hopefully this is where you are going to be able to see how easy it is to build an adaptive card. And I'm hoping that we can get through 3 demos. The first is we're going to build up an adaptive card and send it as a reminder. The second demo is that we're going to take that first card, extend the functionality of it, and solicit input from our user. So request information from our user in Teams without them having to come out and update our Microsoft list. And if time permits, I'll show you how I use adaptive cards in my Power Automate flows to do error handling. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen or my slide deck, and then I'm going to share my my web browser. And as I'm doing that, if there's any questions, please put them into the chat or come off of mute and let me know what you're thinking, what your experiences are with adaptive cards. It'd be great to see in the chat if any of you have built adaptive cards yet. Excuse me. I apologize. I think I'm losing my voice already, and that's not good. So let's get into it. Well, we're going to start right from the beginning. We'll create a new team and a new list and everything else, and just build up slowly. And we'll call this MN365 adaptive cards. Okay, we'll create the team. You don't need to create a new team or a new list to make these things work, but I do want a new container to build all of my items in. I have my team. We're going to assume that this is the hub for my team's work, and the first thing that we want to do is to create a Microsoft list. So I'm going to add a new tab. I'm going to add Microsoft lists. That is spinning. We'll be patient. Click Save. And we're going to create the list from scratch. We'll just call that adaptive cards and we'll create it. And so in the demos, what we're going to see is that we're going to need a few pieces and types of information to make all of this work. And I think that you will probably find that what I'm doing exists in many of the lists that you may have. I'm going to have a title. Pretend that this is a task list. or some type of issue tracker. And, this is going to be the thing we're talking about, the title. The next thing that we want to do is to have a person who is responsible. So we'll call this an owner, and we'll make the type person or group. Sure, we'll allow profile pictures. So we have the thing, we have the who. We need a date to anchor to. We want to send a reminder. Well, we need a due date or something to that effect. So we'll just call this due date, and it's date time, good to go. And so now we have the who. We have the what, we have the who, we have the when, and now we need to know the state. We need to know the status of things. Is it new? Is it in progress? Is it completed? And so on. So we'll use a choice column, and we'll just call this status. And we'll come up with the new, in progress. Actually, let's do it the other way around, in progress. And we'll do this one completed. Colors line up. And our default value will be new. So this will look very similar to some of the lists and the processes that you're reflecting in the list. So let's create a new entry. This one, we'll just use an example that we are doing a Microsoft 365 E5 license upgrade. What a luxury to have those. And then we'll assign it to me. And we'll give it a due date to next week. So let's go next Friday to May 6th. And the status is new. Pretty straightforward, okay? We have the basic elements, and those elements will allow us to provide information, context into our adaptive card. We'll have a recipient of the card. We'll have a date when they're sending the card, and we'll have an idea of what the current state of the card is. So far, so good. So let's go into the Adaptive Cards Designer and build our first card. So I'm going to go to Adaptive Cards Designer. Okay, so let's take a few moments and look at the designer again. I'm going to zoom in. New card. This is where we're going to go and choose from all of the different samples that are available to us. We have some that are, informative and have actions, some that look very similar to what you would expect with a calendaring app, very informative, lots of information, images, almost looks like a dashboard type set of information, colorful, more KPIs through stock updates. Like there's a lot to choose from here. And so instead of creating something from scratch, why wouldn't you leverage these samples? And so let's do that. Let's choose the Malt and Vine restaurant review. Oops, now I want to use a different one. That's not the one I want. I'll use this Malt and Vine one. Okay, so we have our card. Here's the sample that we're going to use. The next thing that we want to do is to look at the target recipient or the target platform. So in this case, it is set to the bot framework for web chat, but we could also send this to Outlook, and you'll notice how it changes. It's still the same content, but the layout changes. We could look at this in Teams dark mode, Teams light mode. This is how a card looks in Viva Connections, Cortana, bot framework, all these other things. For our target platform, we're using Microsoft Teams Lite. So we will have a reasonable side card that could be displayed well inside of a Teams chat or a Teams channel. We can also emulate the device that our card is going to show up on. Are we on a small mobile device? That still looks pretty good to me. Are we on a small tablet? That looks great to me. Desktop. So, they perform well across platforms. So it's a great way for you to validate your one-time build against different platforms and different devices. you'll see that because we're using Teams, we're receiving this warning across the bottom saying that target version 1.4 is only supported by a bot sent card. So we are going to move this to version 1.3. We'll get rid of that incompatibility. And then we will start to manipulate this card to suit our needs. And as I'm doing that, we'll also show some of the element properties and different card structures that you can use. So in this case, I don't need this image, so I'm going to remove it. We're left with an empty column. I'll get rid of that as well. I have this duplicate entry for text. I don't need that. So with this, I have enough to go on, I think, for my card. And the purpose of my card is to take the information from my list, send it to the owner, reminding them when something is due in the context of this card. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I've selected this header row, and it says Redmond, Washington, and it has some dynamic text. I'm not going to use dynamic text. I'm going to just simply call this my list reminder. I've replaced the text, and I have a number of options to set to affect how it looks. So I have spacing, I have horizontal alignment that I can work with. I have font styles that I can set from default to monospace. Yeah, monospace. I can set the weight, and it's not done at like the pixel perfect or the font size. It's just like, you know, bigger, lighter, bolder type thing. So I'm going to set it to bolder. I can choose a color. Colors are not like, you know, red, blue, green. They are the purpose that you're trying to convey. So in this case, I want this to be an accent, like a piece of information. So you may have noticed that it turns into a purplish color. So that one's good. The next thing I'm going to do is to come to the text block for mult and vine. Okay, so this I'm going to replace with dynamic data coming from my Microsoft list. So you can't connect the list to the designer. So you're going to create placeholders inside of the adaptive card text that you will update inside of Power Automate. So my own personal approach is to simply put an @ symbol and the column name that I'm going to use. The @ symbol doesn't do anything except gives me a visual cue that as I go through the JSON, I need to replace this later when I'm inside of my flow. So for me, my approach, anything that is dynamic that I need to replace with dynamic output from my flow, I'm simply putting an @ symbol for me to visually recognize that I have to make this change. I'm just going to scroll down and show that there's a number of formatting options set. It's set to extra large for the font size. The weight is bolder, and this is good. Okay, the next piece, it says 4.5 stars, whatever. I want to put the current status in. So I'm simply going to put current status, and then @ to remind myself that I need to replace this value, status value. It has a light colored font, so I'm going to get rid of that. It's called subtle, and I'm just going to say not set, and you'll see that it turns to the normal, what do you call it, font size. I'm going to change this to accent to match the list reminder, and I'm going to set it to bolder. So I have, you know, visually calling out 2 bits of information. What this is, it's a list reminder, and what's the current status. So we're all good. You also notice that the spacing is a bit tight, so I'm just going to put that to default, and I get a bit more space. We're doing great. Things are going ahead quite well. This text is going to be replaced with the body of the message that I'm going to send. So just a simple reminder, and Then I'm going to use the title from the list is due on, and then at the due date column we used. What else can we do? Click on, there's that more information button that we can use. The list item. Not bad, like we're doing great. And this is not taking a lot of work. So I'm going to look at the options. We can see things like you can set the maximum number of lines, you can do the wrap, you can do height and set that to automatic. The text is set to small. I mean, that's fine. Let's put it to the default for now. And it's looking quite good. So you'll notice that we have this nice description of what the card is all about. And this description, we're going to leverage for the accessibility elements of an adaptive card. So you'll notice inside the JSON, there's the speak entry. And so this would be played back to the user. So I'm going to overwrite the sample and I'm going to replace it with our concatenated text that we're going to build out inside of the flow. And this will be the only area that I manipulate in the JSON while I'm in the designer. And that's for the accessibility piece. The more information button, we'll click on that and we'll take a look at the properties and we'll see that it's going to $URL. I need to replace that with the Sharepoint List URL. So we'll just do that, another @ symbol. All good there. You can pretty up and put on like corporate branding if you wanted to into these cards. So in this case, I want to put, simple image beside the title text. So to do that, I'm going to drag a new column set from the card elements onto the card canvas and drop it where I want it. Then you'll notice that the element has the ability to take action or like do something within it. So in this case, it's a column, so I can add a column. So now I have 2 columns. Great. I have the ability to drag and drop columns around. So my title is now to the right of this empty column, and in the empty column, I will add an image card. So that's in there. And I'm coming over to the card structure. I'll select the column, and then I need to set the URL for an image. So I've got one in my notes, and I'll just cut and paste that in. So we have our image, but I mean, it's not the nicest looking card at this point. So I'm selecting on the image again, and then we'll format the image to, look a little nicer. So we'll come down and we'll look at the size. The size is set to auto, which is probably the size of the image, but I think we might be better off with something like medium. Right, so that's much better, but it's still like taking up too much space for our purposes. So we'll select the outer area and we will look for the width. I always get this wrong. Here we go. Width, stretch. We'll just put that to pixels. And so now we've got a much better alignment. And we'll notice that, the title, it's justified to the top. I'll select that bottom column and I'll look for the element property that allows me to do that. Vertical alignment, we'll set that to center. And I mean, that's it. That is our card. All right, so what are the other things that we can do while we're here? Well, let's go into preview mode. This is what it looks like when it's going to be delivered. Clearly, we want this to be replaced with our dynamic data, and we'll do that inside of the flow. But if we're clicking on things like this more info button, it will tell us what action or what data is being returned inside of there. So in this case, it's going to open the URL that we pass in. Good. So let's save the card for now, and we'll come back to it. But we have this nice looking card, and look at all the JSON code that it auto created for us. So, that is 79 lines of code that we did not have to write. So let's go back to Teams, and Microsoft List. Okay, so what we want to do is to get into Power Automate and build our flow. And this is unfortunately one of the things with Teams is that it doesn't have all the features as Microsoft Lists or the SharePoint experience. I have no way of jumping into Power Automate. I do with Power Apps, which is great. That's a new one. So I have to go into SharePoint. So I'm going to open in SharePoint. Thanks for that. And then we'll notice the integration options. We get the full package of Power Platform options. And I'm going to go into Power Automate now, and I'm going to see my flows. Bring up that in a new tab, and I'm going to create a new flow. My new flow will be a scheduled cloud flow. It'll run on a schedule. It's going to run every day. So MN365, we'll just call this our demo. And we're going to have this run every day. So every day it's going to run, and every day it's going to look for something that needs to reminder. Our trigger is the reoccurrence that we just defined. So the first thing that we want to do is to create a reminder date. So I'm going to use a variable. And inside of that variable, I'm going to create an expression. And the expression will be today's date plus 7 days. And so if anything that is 7 days from now, that's what I want to pull out of that SharePoint list and then send the adaptive card to. So I'm going to initialize a variable and I'm going to rename it. And I suggest that you get into the practice of renaming all of your actions inside of Flow to help you better understand the outputs from the dynamic data as you're working in it. I'm going to set this as a string and I'm going to enter the value and I'm going to use an expression. Now, if my version or if the way I'm using Power Automate looks slightly different than yours, it's only because I've turned on the preview features by going to the settings and then turning on the experimental features. I'm doing this just to get ready for the change, but also some of the expression building is much easier to do and it's definitely easier to display. So don't think that I have anything special going on. It's just the preview. The expression now is I want to add 7 days to the current date. So I'm going to start typing in add. Let me zoom in a bit, see if that's easier to read. FX for expression, add days. Okay, we need a timestamp. Well, what is the current date and time? We'll use UTC now. Okay, now we're going to go to our next element. How many days are we adding? 7 days. Do I want to format the date? Yes, I do. I'm going to format it as year, month, day. And I'm going to click off and the expression is there. Okay, I might zoom out. Next step, let's go to our SharePoint list and pull back all of the rows where the due date is 7 days from now. So let's go SharePoint. List, SharePoint, it's the same thing, different name. So we use the SharePoint actions inside of Flow. We'll do get items. And this is, what is the name of our list? Our list is called adaptive cards. So I'm going to rename that. We're adaptive cards. And if I select the site address, like it doesn't show up the site that we just created. So another benefit to opening up inside of SharePoint is that I have access to the SharePoint URL, and I'm going to add a custom item over to our list site that we just created through Teams. And I'm going to select the list name, adaptive cards, and we have these options and we want to expand the advanced options. And if you've done anything inside of the SharePoint get items in the non-preview feature of Flow, like this is a really nice experience. So I'm going to say filter query. So instead of having to code this up in OData, I can just say the due date equals the value from our variable var date. That's pretty easy. You know, this type of OData filter query is not hard, but it's still easy to screw up if you don't got your single quotes right and whatnot. So let's save this. And we're going to test it because I want to make sure I'm getting data back. Otherwise, it's going to be a silly demo. So I'll test. I agree, Kirk. I like the preview features as well. When I first started using it, I quickly changed it back, but I am starting to appreciate the value that they bring. So the flow runs fine, that's good, but I want to see data. This is not the prettiest user experience from Microsoft. Getting this output of data is really hard to read, but usually near the end, you can start to see the rows that you created, and that's good enough for me. I know I have data, I know I can proceed. Okay, next step. We have our data set. Now let's send the adaptive cards. So new step, we'll go to Teams and we'll post an adaptive card. Now we have a number of options, but the one that we're using for our first demo is to post an adaptive card in a chat or a channel. We are going to send this to the channel for the purposes of this demo. You may not want to do that in the real world implementation of this. You may want to send this to the person that is assigned or is the owner of that particular issue that you're reminding to. You may not want to spam a group channel. You may want to target it directly, but for the purposes of this, I don't have to go into my chat. I'm going to send it into the channel, the general channel of our team that we created for this demo. So I'll post it as the Flowbot. I'll post in the channel. I'll give it the team name. And now it'll resolve the number of channels, or the names of the channels, excuse me. And then it says, well, put in your adaptive card. Well, I don't think you have to be the owner, Nicholas. No, you don't. I mean, everyone's a member inside of a team, so you'll have the ability to send an adaptive card. Yeah, that should be fine. Okay, copy card payload. So that just grabbed all of our JSON for us. Now I'm going to paste this in, and like there was no way I was going to write this JSON. I'm just not that smart. So what I'm going to do is, remember, we are using this little @ symbol as a placeholder or a reference point, whatever you want to call it, to remind me to change that to the list column. So far so good. You'll also notice that it's just like the adaptive card is the action. The moment I change that to the title, Flow is going to recognize that this is a data set, and because it's a data set, it's going to iterate it through and it's going to put it in a loop. No big deal. So I'm going to add a dynamic value, and I'm going to put the title in, and we flipped it into this apply to each. So I'm going to rename this as reminders for myself, because as I create additional loops or additional actions with the same names, I don't want to be like trying to figure out if apply to each one, apply to each two, like which one do I need to reference? Like, be explicit in naming these actions. Okay. Due date, let's change that. And I'll just search for due date. There it is. And this is the speak. So this is our accessibility feature inside of the card, but I've also duplicated that text. So I'm just going to scroll down until I find the same value, and that is on this text section, and I'll just cut and paste. Make sure I don't have things like extra quotes, so that looks good. So I'm going to scroll right back up to the top. So now what could have been typing in JSON code is now turned into, you know, a find and replace operation, and I'd rather do that than write JSON. Okay, title. Highlight. I have to scroll up, look for title, Boom. Status value. If you've used Flow with SharePoint, you probably know that there's going to be multiple statuses. One is the status, which is like a numeric value, and the value is, you know, the text representation of that number. It's like a pointer. So we'll take the value in that case. We've got our reminders text. So the next thing we have to do is the URL. Let's scroll back up and change that to the link to the list item. And that is link to item. Okay. I believe we are good. Just scrolling through, looking for more @ symbols. I'll use my friend, the Flowchecker. No errors, no warnings. I'll take it. I'll test this by running it manually. Remember, it's on a schedule, so you don't need an event to trigger it off. So that's done. Let's see how this thing runs. We get through, it's pulled the data from the data set, and now it's looping through that data set and generating those adaptive cards and sending it over to Teams. So there was one record that had today's date, and it sent that adaptive card. It sent it as the bot, it sent it to the channel. Here's the channel ID. Here's our adaptive card text. So remember that speak line and all the other elements that were dynamic text. We can see our dynamic text coming in, so that's great. The ID, so let's go over and see the experience inside of Teams. So we have you know, the general channel for posts is indicating there's activity, and here's our adaptive card. List reminder, our image is there, our title is there, the status, the reminder statement, and I see I could have used a space there. We'll fix that on the next iteration. And I have the information. So think about this. I'm a user. Hey, Norm, there's a reminder due. Oh, okay, well, I've got a few days. This isn't a big deal. Let me find out more. Do I go hunting around in that list to find it? Or do I just click this link and come straight to the item? I would rather just click the button and come to the item. Granted, we're not in Teams anymore. We had to jump out into the SharePoint experience, but maybe one day someone will figure out a way to stay inside of Teams. But for now, the content is more important, and I have it, and it didn't take any hunting around to do it. So I've pushed that work to our users, and that's great. So let's edit this card, and let's fix that due date, because that was, I need a space there. One more time. Okay, so we pushed the information to our users in our first demo, but we can do better. What we can do is push the same card and give our users all of the options inside of our status column. So the new, the completed, the in progress, give them those options, give them the ability to mark the status, you know, in progress, complete, whatever, without having to leave Teams, without having to leave their current workflow. And that will be tremendous value to our users. Push the work, let them take action where they're working without having to context switch. So to do that, we're going to extend the functionality of the card we just created. So I'm going to copy all of our JSON. Now remember, we updated the JSON to have the SharePoint values. I'll come back to the designer, and I will replace the card payload, Control A, Control V, just how I got through college and university. And now we see the card, the same card, but with that dynamic data from SharePoint. So we're doing great. First thing that we want to do is to have a drop-down menu box on the card for all of those choice statuses. So to do that, we're going to use the inputs choice set card element, and we're just going to drag it onto the canvas. I'm in preview mode. Let me turn that off. Choice set. Now we can. Okay, so we have the drop-down menu box, really easy to do. And the thing that we have to do is to give it a unique identifier, and it's just a name. So in this case, I'm going to call it the user's choice. Done. Now I'm going to go through and plug in the values manually. We're going to have new, in progress. If you're doing this against your own list, you want these values to line up. So if you had 4 values, you're putting in 4 values that line up. If you have 10 values, well, you're doing this 10 times, but you're only doing it once. So we have our options. So let's preview that. And so we have this placeholder text, which I'll update, but essentially our values are now there. That's awesome. So let's go that. And let's change this to read something like set the status, something that, is a little more user friendly. So that's good. We have the card, we have the information, we have the options that they can choose from in the choice. Now we need a button, an action that will send that data back to Power Automate. And so to do that, I'm going to select the card container, and you'll notice that add an action shows up. I'll click that, and I'm going to do a submit action. The submit action will tell Microsoft Flow, the thing that's calling it, what data we're sending back. So it says action submit, and I'm going to just say update. We're going to call this the update button. And now we have to send back data. So we're going to type in some values, and it's just going to be attributes. So we're going to have an open squiggly bracket, and we're going to call this our user action. And we're going to say that the user has updated our list. So let me see if I can zoom this in so you can see it. So squiggly bracket, double quote, user action, double quote, colon, updated. So that's what's going to be sent back. So let me zoom back in. So let's preview and see what happens. So if I go to in progress and click update, hopefully you're seeing this pop up on your screen. I can't tell if you are or not, but it's saying action executed, update. So we know that the user updated, and we're sending back the user's choice of in progress. I apologize if you can't see it. It's just probably the way I'm sharing in Teams. Fantastic. Okay, so
we can see it.
Thanks for saying that. Appreciate that, because I never know. I always get feedback that they can't see the menu button. So good there. Let me copy the card payload, come back into Flow. Let's delete our first card. We don't need this. We can do better. And we're going to go Teams, Post, Adaptive Card. This time, we want to wait for a response. We're still in our loop. We're still working against our data set. Let me rename this. I don't know why it's got a 2 there. Okay, let's open that up. Again, we're going to send this to the channel, but you would probably send this to an individual user. So we're going to send this to the channel. Here's our message. As I scroll through and I paste the text back in, those dynamic values that we added in our first iteration of the adaptive card are now here. But also you can start to see the choice set that we created and the values that we manually added in that line up with our SharePoint list. We have the important user choice, and we get to see the data that's coming back. So that's all good. Scrolling up, just checking. Why is it saying message is required? Don't know. Update message. So you could put in anything you want, but we'll use the default one. And this will be the confirmation to the users when they click that button that the data was sent successfully back to the item that's calling it, which in our case is Flow. So we're going to, again, post this in a team. In the real world, you would probably post this to an individual user. General. Great. So we have our adaptive card. And it wasn't that hard to piece it together. But now we need to handle that returning data inside of our flow. So to do that, we are going to use a case. I'm confusing languages. A case statement. Control switch, sorry. We're using a switch statement. Okay, so this will take all of the data coming back from our adaptive card and assess the data response, and then take particular action on each one, like a branching approach. So I'm going to click on choose a value, and I'll do the dynamic value, and I'll do the dynamic value again. And so we have the variables, we have Sharepoint output, and as I scroll down, you're probably seeing that there's no output from Teams. And that kind of sucks. So that means we are going to have to put in an expression to capture that. And the expression is simply going to we're going to manually say, give us the output from our adaptive card, and then give us the body, the data, and so on. So let's go into our expression builder, and I'm just going to copy and paste this code in so you don't have to watch me type this in manually, but I'll explain it. So the first part says, give me the outputs from post adaptive cards and wait for a response. Well, our action is called post adaptive card and wait for a response. So we're simply saying, give us the output, move into the body, find the data, and give me the user choice. Okay, let's tie this back. Let's connect this back to our adaptive card. We're in preview mode. And if I set the status to in progress and I click update, we see the user choice is in progress. User choice in progress. Our expression is saying, give us the user choice from that output. And when we do that, that's the connection, but then we'll have a list of case statements for each of those choice columns, and then we can take those individual actions. So let me click, and that saves my expression, and I'll do a case for each option that we have. New, and the value will be new. And I'm going to add a Sharepoint update item. So what we're doing is, if the user says the state is new, it's going to set the record or the item to new. Sharepoint update item, and I'm going to rename this site address. It still does not have a record of it, so I'll copy it from SharePoint. I'll come into my flow and I'll paste it in. List name, adaptive cards, ID. This is the ID from getting the initial data set, so there's the ID. Title, you'll notice the little red star. That means it's required text, so we always have to update this again. Title, that's in. And now I'm not going to worry about the other bits of data, but I do want to set the status value. So we have the choices to look up. It's kind of like a hard-coded approach, and I'm going to set that as new. So this first branch is done. Now I need to make two other branches. So here's another thing which I wish would work, but doesn't work. I'm clicking the more options inside of the branch for the new case. That's just rename or delete. I can't do anything with that. So let me expand this and let's go to SharePoint. Let me copy this action to the clipboard. Okay, hopefully that's a step in the right direction, but every time I've done this, I've never been able to get this to paste into the case statement. It works fine everywhere else, but not here. Because the last thing you probably want to do is watch me type this stuff in manually, because I'm not the world's fastest typer. Add an action. Clipboard, do you work today? You do not work today. So, sorry folks, you're gonna have to watch me type this in. SharePoint update item. The good news is, for your users, you're the one who's getting stuck doing this manual typing stuff, and you do it once. And then they get to reap all of those rewards. And so what are the rewards? Well, maybe it is a % here or there saved in their day of time they get back that they get to spend on more valuable things. And so I'm always a firm believer that if I can save a % or two from someone's day, that 1 or 2% is going to add up to something meaningful at the end of the year. And so marginal gains, it's a great way to increase those margins. So this time we're going to, oh, don't forget the title norm. We're going to set this to in progress. Good. And you can probably guess that I'm going to do one more. Let me scroll over. And this one will be for our completed. I use completed SharePoint. The other nice thing about having to do this is that you will always remember how to do a SharePoint update item statement for the rest of your life after doing these. This one's completed. Great. Okay, let me undo the zoom a bit so we can take a look at what we've built. We run our flow every day. We define a reminder threshold. In our case, it's 7 days. We go to our data set and find anything that has a due date that matches our variable date. We post an adaptive card to our user. The user receives the card and then they submit an action back. We capture the action back with our switch statement. We had to create our own expression to capture it, but the expression is essentially the output from the team's action, and we traverse the body, get into the data, and pull back that user choice value that's coming back from our adaptive card. From there, we have individual case statements that run against each data value that could be returned from the adaptive card. So we had new, in progress, and completed. Each one has a corresponding set of actions, and in this case, we're simply setting the status. You could do a plethora of things depending on your business requirements. So let's check with Flowchecker. He's happy. Let's test. Let's fire this up and see how we make out. Yeah, my screen's not frozen. It's just doing what it's doing. There we go. It says it started successfully. Okay, we get through the first steps like we did before. We have our data set, and you'll notice that the apply to each in the reminders loop will just continue to run. It's continuing to run because it's waiting for feedback from us. If I go over to our team, I'll notice that the general channel has got notifications, and I see that our card has come through. Card looks great. I have our choices. I'm going to select completed. I've done the upgrade, and now I'm going to select update. That is a fantastic question, Nicholas. And it's not the card, it's more what happens to the flow. The flow will be orphaned, and as the account gets decommissioned, eventually the flow will break and stop working. You'll notice that we've got the transaction message saying, thanks for your response. So the card was successful. It sent the data back to Flow. So let's go over to Flow. We'll see that the flow has finished running. It's gone through the case statement, but let's take a look at the output from the card. We'll see the time that it was responded to, and we'll see that the submit action was that update, and that the user choice data coming back was completed. Let's scroll down and let's look at our case statements. And if I go to completed, I see that it did the Sharepoint list item, and it set the title back to the title and the status value to completed. If I go into the list, hooray, it's completed. So, this is just a small demo, but what we're showing here is the power of using data in the form of Microsoft lists as a point of collaboration through teams, where we can add value through automation using Power Automate and improve the user experience by combining all of those tools together into a single low code, no code solution that not just someone in IT can do, but maybe some of your power users as well. There's going to be a lot of situations where we just don't have apps for these types of scenarios. So using things like Flow, Power Automate, lists, you can glue together, a solution platform that starts connecting and filling those gaps of the major processes and apps and services that exist for your users. So I'm always a big fan of this, not because it saves, it solves major issues for an organization. There's larger initiatives to cover those things off, whether it's like a new ERP implementation or a new enterprise level application. Those things are there, those business critical things, but there's still so much opportunity to add value. And whether you do that value through being an advocate of these Microsoft 365 tools, or if you're a power user and you're creative and eager to take these things on, you can do this. I literally did it, and I'm not a developer. So this is, I've always been interested in using Flow, and I know that others inside of whether it's the audience or your organizations can probably pick this stuff up as well. So my hope is that you see that the barrier to adopting adaptive cards, especially when you look at this JSON code, it seems high, but the tooling is not that bad. The tooling removes that barrier. Things like Flow, yeah, so a standard user may not know what this flow pattern looks like, but shoot, I've blogged about it, people blog about it, or people are speaking about it. You can pick this up and move it to the next level. This is great. So any questions? How are we doing for time?
We're doing good, Norm. We've got 25 minutes left. There are 2 questions in the chat. I don't know if you can see them or not, or if you want me to read them to you.
Yeah, are they from Nicholas? I think I've answered those.
Yeah, I thought you did too.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Well, if we have time, I would very much like to show you how I use adaptive cards. Yes, that's what I'm getting to. How I use adaptive cards to handle errors inside of my flows. Okay, so let's get right into it. First thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a new variable. And so what error handling looks like in Power Automate is attempting to run something, determining if that something passed or failed, and if it failed, do something about it, and then, continue on and exit the operation. So we'll do something like that. So we're going to initialize a new variable. This new variable is going to be called, yes, Tony, you can transfer ownership of the flow. You just create something called co-owners or debug. So inside of this variable, we are going to grab all of the debug information that we can from executing our flow. So it's going to be a string, but I'm going to present an initial value. And this is just going to say list of action names and statuses. Okay, so far so good. To have the set of actions that we run to try and see if there are errors, we're going to put them in containers. And these are called scopes. I'll add a scope, and this will take all of the actions and just treat them as a single container of action. So I'm going to rename this to try. We're going to try the set of transactions. So I cannot put my variables inside of a scope, but I can put my Sharepoint get items. And I can put all of the actions that I have in my apply to each. Okay, so we have our first scope contained, and then we'll create a second one. So this is our try scope where we're going to try these transactions. So let's add a new step, and this will be a scope as well. This one is going to be our catch. We'll try and catch any errors. Renamed. Okay, so I only want to execute the catch if there was something wrong in the try. So to do that, you go to more options and you do configure run after. And I want to only run this against failed items. So again, I've gone to more options, configure run after only for failed items. You'll notice that the line that, the workflow line or whatever this thing is called, it's red and it's dashed. That's to let you know that it only runs when there's an error. Okie dokie. First thing that we're going to do is to have another loop. This is going to be an apply to each loop. And inside of this loop, we are going to take the output from anything that failed in try and append it to our variable called var debug. So we are going to use an expression. And the expression is the results. And we have to say what we're getting the result from. So we're going to use the results from the scope. So it was scope. And it was, spaces in Power Automate expressions are underscore dash underscore try. So anything coming out of our scope try is going to get put into this loop. Okay, click there. So there's a result. And now I'm going to append the string variable that we created. And this we're going to append to our var debug. I can spell right, debug. Okay, we are going to put in some static text and dynamic text. So I'm going to put in action name. I'm going to put in an expression. Oops, I clicked off. Sorry, my mouse is spazzing out. The expression is going to be from, I'm just going to copy and paste this in. I don't want to run out of time, but I'll explain what I've pasted in. The items that came out of the apply to each, so apply to each var debug, give me the name element. Okay, so let's do that. And so there's our first line. I'm going to do this again. So I've got the name, but now I want the status, action status. Similar expression. This time I don't want name, I want status. So catch anything failed out of the try, right? So our SharePoint item, our adaptive card business, catch anything that failed there, put it into this loop, and then give me the status element. Ah, you bugger. Sorry, folks. I think it's just me. It's not the mouse. There we go. All right. Action name, action status. We're doing good. I'm in the loop. I want to add an action outside of the loop. And what I'm going to do is to compose the variable that we've been appending to. So let me get var debug in here. And so now when this runs, we'll have a nice set of text that we can leverage. So we need a new adaptive card. So I'm back to my designer, turn this off of preview mode, and I'm just going to do some really simple changes. This is a list reminder. Imagine this is your, I don't know, your solution name or something like that. And I'm going to change the color from accent to attention, and that goes red. I'm going to get rid of the dynamic text for the title, and I'm just going to say, I don't know, cards. You call this whatever makes sense to you. Get rid of this current status business, and I'm just going to say, hey, flow error, please investigate. And when I do this at my own work, the list reminder is the name of the solution or the business application. The corporate logo is here. Instead of saying adaptive cards demo, it's the flow name that I'm dynamically grabbing, and I've got the environment that I'm running it in, the variable name all appended in here, so it's quite readable. For this, we wouldn't do that, but you can get what am I trying to say? Not more verbose, but you can make it more meaningful to you that you're not getting all of these different adaptive cards for failures that all look the same. You'll have ways of creating dynamically driven notifications, and that's what a lot of the things that I've done. So using the same card, well, we want to get rid of this maximum lines business. We don't need that. The reminder, let's get rid of this, and this is going to be the values from our var debug that we just composed, and we'll get rid of these actions and elements that we don't need, because we don't have anything that magically jumps us over into Power Automate to see where the flow is. So there's not much to preview here. I'm happy with this. I'm going to copy the card payload. I'm going to go into flow. We have our compose statement. Ooh, I think we missed something. I know we missed something. This speak business that we had, the accessibility line, it references information that we won't see. So I need to say simply flow error, please investigate. Almost got caught on this one, investigate. And that would have caused me tons of debugging on your time, which I don't want to do. And then finally, let's do Teams, adaptive card action. And let's post an adaptive card. So in this case, when you're really flushing this out, you're going to have some, hopefully this is driven, data-driven and dynamic for you. So you know who the admin is, and you're looking up that value, and you're sending these notifications to that individual user, not so much into the channel. But again, because this is a demo and we're keeping it all contained within our team, we'll post it in the channel, team, general, adaptive card, paste that in, and we have one element to change, and that is going to be the output from our compose of the var debug. So let's come here, compose output Flowchecker. Are we happy? I think we're happy. Let's test. No, wait, we need to create a failure. Look. And I need to finish one more thing. We've got the catch. We should do one more scope. And this will be our finally. We're not going to put anything in finally yet, but it's going to be the place where if it was successful, if it failed, if it was skipped, and it was timed out, this is going to be the place that captures all of that. So if this was a mission critical, business critical flow, you might have an action in the finally that was logging all of the events, regardless of they were successful, failure, but think of like audit level information. You would have an action here. It's like your fail safe. So try, if it works, great. If it fails, go to catch. Catch should do something. If catch still can't go, then let's go to finally for our, our audit logging type of thing. So we've got those three areas. You'll notice that the after configure after run, or whatever the hell that thing is called, configure run after is set, and this will do everything. The catch will only run when something has failed. And now let's force a failure. And thankfully, JSON is easy to break. ABC 1, 2, 3. That should break our try statements inside of the card. Let's close this up. One more flow check. It's happy. Let's test this. Kick that off. Grab a quick drink. Come on, Power Automate, you can do it. Okay. So I think what happened is I got caught by the thing I didn't want to see. Speak. That's interesting. Our debug. Ah, son of a gun. So when I had that twitchy mouse action, it put my expression in the apply to each var debug. Okay. Flowchecker doesn't check that much, but it's there to make you feel better. Okay, let's hope this runs again. Your flow is running. Great. It's in the try section. It is saying, yuck, I don't like what you did to the JSON code, right? Doesn't understand all that, so that's great. So it was containerized, and then it went into the catch. And the catch said, give me all of the actions and the statuses, and let's put them into the debug variable. So the get items adaptive cards, it succeeded. Let's go to the next element in the array, and we'll see that the apply to each reminders failed. That's pretty cool. So we have an idea of what was failing, and because we composed it, we have this nice text layout that we can use inside of our adaptive card that would get sent to our flow administrator or the person managing this business process. Flow error, please investigate. My typing is atrocious. So that worked out well. And now I come to the adaptive card, and imagine this has gone to my business process owner. They are getting this message saying they need to do something, but more importantly, it tells them where they have to focus their time and attention to. I've been writing some business critical flows in the last 6 months, and sometimes there are things that you just can't plan for. And this type of error handling, using scopes, using the results output and putting it into something like a variable, and then sending it into a cart saves you so much time. It's a little bit of work to set up, but it's a great flow pattern for you to adopt with all of your flows that you're using inside of your organization that move beyond that personal productivity and now become more of like the business critical type flows. And so we have a clean flow that if I added some comments to the person coming in after me, will have the ability to support this. So I'm just so happy with when a flow works the way it does, and using data as a point of collaboration, and automating processes and triggering events and trying to find value, even if it's small, for our users or for our teams and our organizations. In time, these marginal gains turn into huge improvements. So I hope you can see the value in using these tools at your disposal to know that you can get into adaptive cards using some of the tools I've shown today and really make a difference for your processes and your users. So that's really the end of the demos. And it was great that we got to show that that air handling one, and because it really gets into some nice patterns and practices around flow. So please let me know if there's anything that you want to ask me that I haven't handled that was coming through the chat. And yes, Kirk, you're absolutely right. This is way better than waiting for an email after the fact, because those emails don't tell you anything. Yeah, so Melanie, thank you so much for saying that. Final thing, thank you for attending. You know, it feels like we're coming out of the pandemic. Many of us are continuing to work either remotely or in a hybrid form and fashion, but that virtual meeting fatigue is still there for me, and I'm sure it's there for you. So I truly appreciate that you've taken this hour and a half to spend with me. It's always a pleasure coming to the Minnesota events. You guys do such a great job. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. So thank you so much for your time. Have a great day. Have a great weekend, and enjoy the rest of the sessions.